Journalists are extremely skeptical when it comes to politicians, which is a good thing. I mean, the working assumption is that everything a politician says is spin. They say their job description is public service, and that's part of it. But the main job of a politician is just to get reelected. Sorry, that's just human nature. Which is why journalists hold institutions like the Auditor General in such high regard, and other referees like the Access to Information Commissioner and the Lobbyist Commissioner, and even our courts. They're all checks and balances on our politicians. Our democratic system fosters this healthy distrust. It's why we have an official opposition whose job is to scrutinize and even attack other politicians as zealously as possible. It's why our parliament is an extreme free speech zone. The laws of defamation don't even apply there. And people who say they don't like negative campaign ads or the noise of question period are faking their disdain. Those are the best ways, really, the only ways to handle politicians, unless those politicians are called Indian chiefs, because then our whole chattering class in Canada, the journalists and the political pundits and the university professors, all those secondhand dealers of ideas who process the news for us and tell us how to think, that same media party that's usually so skeptical, well, they stop being skeptical. They become stenographers, just accepting anything they're told. Stenographers, no, cheerleaders is more like it. Instead of being ferocious watchdogs, journalists roll over and let politicians rub their tummies. Only if they're Indian politicians, though. And the tools that we normally use to scrutinize and challenge politicians, the Auditor General, access to information requests, full financial disclosure, well, they just don't exist for Indian chiefs. They're exempt. We can't even find out what all Indian chiefs earn. Now, for the 99% of us Canadians who don't have to live on Indian reserves, I guess it doesn't matter that much that an Indian chief gets away with things that non-Indian politicians couldn't. I mean, sure, we're the ones paying billions of dollars a year that gets lost in the black hole of reserve accounting, but really it's a rounding error in our welfare state. But what about the Indians who actually have to live under this Indian political elite? Not the fancy pants Indian industry types, the lawyers and professors and chiefs and others living high off the hog. But what about the regular folks, not connected to the power and the money? What can they do about this? I mean, it's not easy speaking out against powerful politicians, even in the rest of Canada. But imagine how hard it must be in a place like Attawapiskat, the Indian reserve in Northern Ontario run by Chief Spence and her boyfriend, Clayton Kennedy. There are only 300 homes in Attawapiskat. It's a very small place, but there are so clearly haves and have-nots there. There are the have-nots. We've seen them on TV living in clapboard houses with leaky roofs. They look like they're in trailer parks or even in the third world. But then there's the haves. They drive Escalades up there in Attawapiskat, you know? I mean, take Chief Teresa and her boyfriend, Clayton Kennedy. She makes close to 6 figures as the chief, and he makes $850 a day as the band's financial manager. Between the two of them, they make more than $280,000 a year. Because they're on a reserve, it's tax-free. Now, as I mentioned in yesterday's show, there are actually jet setters up in Attawapiskat. One of the politicians there racked up a $68,000 travel bill in just 2 months. Another politician, a technical manager, took $171,000 tax-free in a town of just 300 homes, just 1,500 people. How do you even do that? Now, but before she became chief, Teresa worked briefly as the manager of the Attawapiskat daycare, and she was being paid more than $8,000 a month. This tiny town has 3 chiefs and 18 band counselors on the payroll, all earning full-time money. And then there are the school boards and the health boards and the power boards and the investment boards. Yeah, that's right, investments. The band's stock portfolio holds close to $9 million worth of shares in, Apple Computers, China Mobile cell phone company, bank stocks, oil and gas stocks. They're tycoons. They're rich. They've run multi-million-dollar surpluses at Attawapiskat. But again, that's just the ruling class, the politicians. And in a town that small, the haves and the have-nots divide up pretty quickly along family lines. Chief Teresa just happens to be dating the town financial manager. The Hukama family just happens to have 8 of the plumbest jobs in government. Those are the rich ones, the millionaires. But then there are the poor ones. Say, do you think Chief Teresa and her rich boyfriend, Clayton Kennedy, do you think they live in one of those leaky roof homes? No, they don't. Because it's a reserve, and as you may know, there is no private property on a reserve. It's against the racist Indian Act to have private property. So who gets the nice houses and who gets the crummy houses? Well, that's a political decision. Which brings me back to my point. Indian politicians on a reserve need even more scrutiny than white politicians do because the chiefs have so much more power over the lives of ordinary people than white politicians do. Now, yesterday I poked fun at Chief Teresa's fake hunger strike. Today is day 24, which is longer than any hunger strike Mahatma Gandhi could do. And she's nearing the halfway point of the IRA hunger strikes that ended up killing those hunger strikers in the 80s. But Teresa looks as fat as she did the day she began. I mean, sorry, at day 24, a real hunger striker doesn't have a double chin. Now, that's not the point here. I don't care that she's faking the hunger strike and even admitting that she's snacking up a storm. She says she's eating fish soup, but more on that later with an actual medical doctor. Look, the point is that such a stunt by a regular politician would be mocked and scrutinized by the political class. They would ask her what her game is. They would puzzle over the vagueness of her demands. She wants a meeting with the Prime Minister, but she won't say precisely what she wants from him. But I don't really care about how thin or fat Teresa is. I'm actually glad she's faking a hunger strike because a slow-motion suicide is a horrible thing. But what I do care about is how Teresa Spence and her boyfriend are running the reserve up in Attawapiskat. Why did they spend $96,000 on a new Zamboni last year instead of fixing those leaky houses? Why did they spend $200,000 on gifts? Why did they spend $36,000 on a goose hunt? How do you even do that? There is an extreme disconnect between the millionaire lifestyle of the political one-percenters in the Indian industry, versus the abject poverty of the 99% of grassroots Indians. Journalists usually champion David against Goliath. They usually side with the underdog. They usually ask tough questions of the powerful because if journalists don't, well, maybe no one else will. Certainly not someone who is poor and scared and living in a leaky, cold house in Attawapiskat's bad part of town. You know, we have a saying, you can't fight City Hall. Well, could you imagine how hard it is to fight City Hall in a reserve, like Attawapiskat, where everyone in the reserve government is friends or family or lovers? I mean, if they put you in the leaky shack already, imagine what the banned politicians might do if you really tried to make a fuss about something. That's why we need real journalists when it comes to Indian governance and accountability and corruption, more than ever. You think Montreal's corruption at their City Hall is bad? Well, imagine a City Hall that controls everything in your life, right down to which house you're allowed to live in. Let me use an example or two of the toughest political pundits around who normally tear into politicians like bulldogs. Let me show you how poodly those bulldogs become in the face of Indian politicians called chiefs. These clips are from the CBC yesterday, but they really could be from any TV station in Canada other than The Sun. The whole media party is in cheerleading mode for Chief Teresa and the Idle No More campaign. Here's Rob Silver, Liberal pundit. Look.
Sun TV's reaction has been, which is to attack, to treat both groups, Idle No More and Chief Spence, like they're any other stakeholder, like they're environmental groups, like they're labor unions, and they're just going after them, going after financial history, going after all kinds of stuff the same way they would Justin Trudeau or an environmental NGO. It is a huge mistake.
But Chief Spence is just another politician. She's not a priest or a religious leader. She's certainly not a saint. She's not a charity or a nonprofit. She is a millionaire chief, a politician who has run her town into the ground. Why should she alone be exempt from scrutiny? Why? Because she's trying to embarrass Stephen Harper and that suits the Liberals just fine? Look, I understand the noblesse oblige here. Oh, don't pick on a woman. Don't pick on an Aboriginal. It's not nice to do that, and we have to be nice. Well, listen, I care about Aboriginal women too. Not just the millionaires, though, but the 99%ers who have to live under the millionaires and who don't have travel budgets and per diems and expense accounts and media handlers to get on TV. But look at what Silver's actually saying. You can't even criticize Indian politicians because they're not even really politicians. They're some kind of mystical, holy people above us all. No. They're flesh and bone. They're fallible. They're corruptible, especially if you don't hold them to account and tell them that you never will. Now, here's Silver's NDP colleague, Ian Capstick, chiming in too.
I can't understand how the communications masters within the Conservative Party haven't used this as a catalyst to have a nation-to-nation meeting with First Nations people.
Well, that's the thing, Ian. Indian bands may call themselves nations, but they're not sovereign countries. I mean, they gave that up, any claim to being a country, when they signed treaties submitting to the sovereignty of the Crown. In the case of Attawapiskat, It was in 1930 when they accepted the King of England as their sovereign under Treaty 9. Now, they might use the phrase First Nation, but they are not an independent sovereign nation. A town with 300 homes is not a nation. It doesn't have embassies and ambassadors and summits with our Prime Minister, even if they want one. Harper does meet from time to time with Indian chiefs under our Canadian laws. I mean, all 600 Indian chiefs elect a Grand Chief to represent them. His name is Sean Atleo. Harper meets with them regularly. I mean, Harper could not meet with all 600 Indian chiefs whenever they were bored. He doesn't meet with 600 mayors a year. Now, Silver and Capstick like Chief Teresa because she's embarrassing Stephen Harper. But it's actually more than that, and it's worse than that. Look, Capstick and Silver are urban liberal elites who have this mythical notion of Indians as noble savages who we must preserve in a state of nature, and to apply regular rules to them as if they were other politicians. Well, that would be racist. No, it's not. In fact, it's racist to excuse Indian chiefs' horrendous management of Indian reserves just because they're Indian. That's racist. It's racist to say, how dare we scrutinize Attawapiskat's financial statements like we would any other governments. It's racist to say, Harper must treat this small-town mayor like she's a queen. Sorry, she's a drama queen, but that's enough for Capstick and Silver, but she ain't our real queen. Now, I care more for the Queen's subjects. Those are the Indians I care about. But Capstick and Silver are too busy proving how sensitive they are to the snacking chief to have a moment for the real Indians. Okay, one more quick clip from the CBC yesterday. This is by an Indian industry professor, a woman named Pam Palmater, who ran for Grand Chief last year and lost. But she's become a media darling for this Idle No More protest. Look.
There is literally an army of volunteers behind this, organizing and strategizing and writing and researching and making connections. I have no fears about the kinds of activities that First Nations are doing, even when they do escalate, about us becoming violent. If you look at all of the flashpoints in history over time, you know, whether it's Gustafson Lake or Oka or any of the other ones, it's always Canada that takes the first shot.
So Pam Palmater casually mentions that violence is quite possible. She has no problem with that. And it's acceptable because it's Whitey's fault if it happens, like Oka was. Now, can you imagine if a white political activist said that? If someone, say, in the construction industry in Montreal said that if you push us, if you ask where the money went, you just might get hurt. Could you imagine? I mean, that would be huge news. It would be a scandal. But not yesterday on the CBC. Pam Palmater, an Indian industry one-percenter, warned of violence, and no one batted an eye because she's Indian, you see. Just like Silver and Capstick say that Indian politicians don't have to answer for financial management issues and corruption, well, they don't have to answer for threats of violence either, do they? Well, sorry, that's racism. It's the soft bigotry of low expectations. It's saying, hey, they're Indians, so it's not that shocking that they're corrupt or violent. No, 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 no. We must treat Indians the same as everyone else. No better, no worse. Indian chiefs and one-percenters should not be above the law or above our criticism. And Indian grassroots, the 99% who aren't on TV, they should not be beneath the law or below our interest or curiosity or care. The Sun News Network loves Indians as much as we love any other race of Canadians. I'm sure the rest of the media would say the same about themselves. But here at the Sun, we are the only people standing up for the Indian 99% and daring to hold Indian politicians to the same standards and laws as everyone else.